Okay, guys, it looks like we got a good live stream. And I'm Moshe coming to you from Israel in the Galilee on the 26th of April. And right now we're about, I don't know, a little bit at 8:09 or so, a little bit after 8 in the morning. Our weather here, we hit 91 yesterday. We're at 72 now. It's delicious. And we're going to get up to what? Let's see, 87. And there's no rain in the forecast for today or the near future, like 10 days out, no rain. I think we're finished with that. So the house is going to start warming up. I had to sleep with the fan on last night. I didn't blow it on me, I just blew it to keep the air in the room moving. We got a lot to cover. Trump never did send Vance or Witkoff or Kushner to the Pakistan thing yesterday. There was a lot of nonsense, false news. Trump was responsible for a lot of it, make them believe there was going to be a negotiation, and there wasn't. And the Iranians said clearly, there's no negotiation. The guy from the military's going down there on a trip where he's going to be going to Pakistan, then he's going to Oman, and then he's going to Russia, Moscow. So they said that's what's going on. It's nothing, no negotiations. And then I think they wanted to be a little bit arrogant with Trump. So what they, I'm going to move this a little bit. So what they did is they gave Trump their written, what would you call it, proposals for what they want in terms of a negotiation, which Trump, of course, rejected. They wanted to, first thing they want, they're not negotiating with Trump unless he gets rid of the blockade, which he's not going to do. Then the next thing they want is him to get out of the Middle East entirely. The U.S. pulls out everywhere, and it goes down from there. They want to be in control of the Persian Gulf and charge tolls and their nuclear program and their missile program. You leave us alone, and we want war reparations and da 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 da. Let's not even talk about telling us to not slaughter our own people. It's Trump basically is now in the mode that's a little bit more in the real world. And he's telling them, well, they got my phone number or our phone number. They could call us anytime they want. So Trump is realizing the negotiations with them are really not going to happen. They're not really afraid. Okay. And I heard there was over 200 refueling tankers in Europe. In Europe, not in the Middle East. I don't know how many there are in the Middle East. I would say probably 50. There's 9 in Israel. Now, Israel has their own. We have our own refueling tankers. I think we got over a dozen. We got in the teens. So they could be ours, but because there's F-22 Raptors there, which nobody but America has, I believe they're American refueling tankers. Now, 9 refueling tankers, they typically can fill 5 fighter jets. So it's 45 fighter jets, that can go to Iran and back. I think on a tank plus a refill tank, they can do Iran and back, depending where back is, but okay. The 3 aircraft carriers are, I believe, now together around the Indian Ocean, Sea of Oman, or the Gulf of Oman, whatever they call it over there. with their escort vessels, and I'm sure there's submarines. They just never talk about it. They never tell you, oh, there's submarines here. They don't want you to. They don't want to reveal that, but there's submarines. I'm sure of it. They wouldn't take a chance with 3 carriers without a few. I mean, the minimum would be 2, but I think it would probably be 3. That's a bunch of submarines, 3. I don't think it's 6 or anything like that. Okay. Could be, I don't know, but I don't think so. Russia and Ukraine are in a big battle, and there was a drone that I would think accidentally fell in Romania. I don't believe anybody got hurt. And they're writing news headlines to suck people in, and they're saying Russia, drone attack on NATO country or something. It's Romania, which is a NATO country, and it was a drone that fell down, and they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to go Article 5. They're not going to go to war. It's these people that just want to suck you in. Now we're hearing all this stuff. Oh, we're getting EAMs. What's an EAM? Well, the people on the social media call it a emergency action message. What do they sound like? They sound like Echo, Bravo, Foxtrot, 3, 9 or 4, Sierra, Kilo, and they sit there and they say, "Oh, we're getting codes that we never saw before." They don't know what the darn codes mean. And they're saying, oh, they're encrypted, you can't break them. Nonsense. They're easily broken with today's high-speed computers. They're easily broken. Easily. I mean, these things are, 10, 12, 15 letters. I mean, it'd take them maybe not even 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I don't know, maybe a few seconds. It's, these are not critical. They're not giving coordinates to drop bombs. There was some thing that happened, and then all of a sudden they found out the planes were shutting off their transponders. They didn't know where they were going. And in addition to that, there were no more EAMs. They were using some other kind of message that was very difficult for them to pick up. It likely could have been sent with a burst transmitter. So then what is a burst? Well, they take something that's maybe 90-second message and make it a half a second or a second. So we go, and they, most people, it even escapes them. I don't know what the compression time rates are, but it's very fit. Just, it's a burst, and then your receiver disentangles it. Believe me, they're not sending any of this stuff out with any, people for years were listening to emergency EAM, and does anything happen when they say? Not a thing. They don't do the solar flares anymore. Maybe it's because I've been sitting there telling people I watched the solar flares many, many, many times, and nothing ever happens. So I don't hear the solar flare. I mean, I that doesn't go on anymore. They were scaring people with that. No more. It's a joke. Nuclear sniffers. They talk about that stuff all the time. Do I think it's real? No. Does it mean anything? It never has so far. Then they got doomsday planes. Oh my gosh, in the last 3 years, how many times have we heard the doomsday planes in America taking off in Russia, and then what happens? Nothing. These guys got cult followings, people that are not believers, and they listen to this stuff because they want to get an inside scoop as to what's going on in the world, and they refuse to use Bible prophecy to guide their way. Instead, they listen to these people create scare tactics, and then they go out and they buy the survival food they sell. They buy the protective boxes you put your cell phone in, and oh my gosh, it's just, you know, it just goes on and on. You know, years ago, it used to be fashionable to buy an old car where you had no sophisticated electronics. I don't remember what the cutoff year was, 60 something. You know, I'm pretty sure if you were buying a 67 car, 1967, you didn't have any of these sophisticated electronics. You had you had a carburetor, an intake manifold, an exhaust manifold, and you had cylinders and gas pumps, and you didn't have any of this stuff. It was just you didn't have a chip and plug it into a computer and it would tell you what was wrong. None of that went on. Okay, they didn't have any of that. You know. So we're going out and buying those older cars, rebuilding them, and keeping them around so in case there was an EMP attack, those cars wouldn't be affected. So to do an EMP, you got to be 25,000 miles up and detonate a nuke up there. Yeah. And tell me, how do you get through the firmament in Genesis 1? I don't know how you penetrate that, And you think these people have nukes all these decades and decades and they never use them? You believe that? How could you believe that? They had them, they used them. All right. So let me go we're going to cover what's likely to happen with Iran and what's likely to happen with Trump. And we're going to combine the assassination attempt yesterday and try to see how that's going to motivate Trump. And Iran is allegedly planning a very large missile attack on the Gulf states. They said selected Gulf states. So I'm of the belief they're not going to attack Oman, but the others, I think, are all going to get it, and not Yemen. And maybe Iraq is on their side, so they'll leave Iraq alone. And they'll probably leave Syria alone. We don't say Syria, we say Syria. Pretty close, though. And they, of course, are going to shoot at Israel. But I didn't hear Europe. But that doesn't mean they're not going to shoot at Europe. They're not like Trump. They don't go out there boisterously saying, oh, we're going to hit Europe. They're going to say they're going to hit everybody else, and then they'll just go ahead and hit Europe. And we're up to fighting in Hezbollah. The ceasefire thing is finished. There's no ceasefire talk of going on with Hezbollah in Lebanon and Israel. There's nothing. Whose cat? There's no cat behind me. You're looking and thinking you see something. There's no cat in the house. We don't own a cat. We don't have a cat. Dogs, you might have seen the dog. All right, I'm going to put a post up here real quick and then we'll get going. Prophecy is going to be getting fulfilled. Jeremiah 49, starting in verse 34 to the end of the chapter. They're not talking about that Sunday morning from 11 to 1 in the buildings, are they? But your Bible talks about it. Okay, I'm finished. Let me do a spell check thing here. See if I got typos. Oh, now the type font on the YouTube came back to a real level. It was so tiny for a couple of days. I don't know what happened. All right, let me post this and we'll pin it, they call it, I guess. And then we'll get going. Okay, it looks like we're good. I'll shut off this thing. All right, being a Old Testament, New Testament Bible believing site, we're going to do some praise, and if anybody joins in or doesn't join in, I have no controls on that. Okay, there is no God like Jehovah. 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 There is no Messiah like Yeshua. 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 Okay. Well, packages are starting to move in Israel now. I don't know how long they'll be moving. One that I was looking for is arriving today or tomorrow. But once this lights up again, that'll stop. Iran had a chance to rebuild, and I'm sure Israel rebuilt also. But we didn't have to rebuild our missile cities. We probably serviced our jets, and pilots got home with their family, got to sleep 12 hours a day and walk around the streets and see, people, and, that kind of thing. Takes the stress away. It's not a lot of fun being inside the cockpit of a plane for many hours, in the beginning, oh, what a great thrill, I'm going to fly, but, I've known pilots, and most of them, when they get out of the military, never fly again. You don't hear them going around buying Cessnas and flying or renting. So they don't bother with it anymore. You do hear of a bunch that get jobs working for airlines. That you hear about. They make money, but they don't make that much money anymore. They're not that highly paid. But I've known a lot of military pilots that get out and they just don't want to go near an airplane anymore. They're nice guys, Usually they do okay in business because they know how to dig their heels in and stick to something and see things through, and they're not stupid people, and they get into other industries and they do okay. Most of them, I think the Vietnam pilots was a different thing. The World War II pilots who, I had a friend, a roommate in college, his father was one. I didn't know many at all, no. But they did okay too. You can't In America, you can't be a dumbbell and make it to pilot, you know. But more than that, you got to have an ability to be dedicated to stick to the task and see things through. They got determination, you know. They got a lot of personality traits that lend themselves generally to doing okay in business. All right. So some guy rushed at a building in the White House grounds, the way there was a correspondence dinner, and he was like 50 yards out or something like that. And he was firing. He had handgun, rifle, a shotgun, handgun, and knives. And the Secret Service got him. I might have wounded him, but he's in custody. He didn't hurt anybody. They evacuated Vance and Trump and the Speaker of the House. That's the order of succession. If Trump dies, it goes to Vance. Vance dies, it goes to the Speaker of the House. If Trump and Vance died, it would go to the Speaker of the House. He'd be president, or she. So they got no talks, no negotiations, nothing on schedule. Pakistan's pulling the hair out. They got a mutual defense treaty with Saudi Arabia, and Iran is attacking Saudi Arabia. So Pakistan has to either breach the treaty with the Saudis or they'll be fighting against Iran. Because Iran's fighting against Saudi Arabia. There's no really good way out of this because the Saudis didn't initiate the attack. The Iranians did. Americans got a Iranian ship wanted for sanctions. Okay, we're back. That was us idiots putting blocking my live stream with some stupid upgrade your operating system, which I don't want to do. During the ceasefire, 2 weeks or whatever it's been, Iran has been repairing damage to the missile cities, which mostly entrances and exits were not functioning. They blocked those various ways, which we covered previously. And they were moving missiles and missile launches around the country. Now, the trip to Pakistan very likely had to do with the upcoming attacks that Iran's going to be doing. And they're probably trying to get Pakistan to stand down, not come after them on behalf of Saudi Arabia. That probably took the form of telling Saudi Arabia they needed to do a few things and they wouldn't be attacked. Undoubtedly, the first thing would be you've got to get the American military aircraft and all of that out of your country, which I doubt Saudi Arabia is going to do. And the next thing would be agree to only sell oil off the US dollar, and you got to pay $2 million a ship toll tax when they go in and out of the Persian Gulf. I think the Saudis think they got a better deal sticking with Trump here. Personally, do I care what happens to Pakistan in this thing? No, they're an enemy of Israel. I really don't care. They're between a rock and a hard place, okay? It was rather stupid of them to sign this deal with Saudi Arabia. Now, rest assured, they got something from Saudi Arabia out of this. Saudi Arabia is not known for its military prowess and ability. So the Pakistanis didn't pick up a really strong military ally that they could use to fight against India. No, that didn't happen. So it probably was economic. So Pakistan's going to either betray their brother Muslim terrorist lunatic country, Iran, by joining in the fight, or they're going to betray Saudi Arabia by not joining in the fight and breaking their agreement. Trump will do nothing under the sun about Pakistan breaking the agreement with Saudi Arabia. He might badmouth them, that's it. Saudi Arabia, the chances of them attacking Pakistan, 0. I don't really think they're going to be that helpful in helping Saudi Arabia anyway. I don't think Israel or America would want Pakistan attacking Iran while they're doing so. They wouldn't want it. Their pilots are not up to speed. Their aircraft are not up to speed. I don't think they'd want it. I think Trump would insist they stand down and not do it. While they're there, they don't want this. They got 13,000 soldiers plus the aircraft in Saudi Arabia now, but I don't know what they might attack the Houthis. You see, their treaty with Saudi Arabia would cover the Houthis too. So if the Houthis start acting up, they may attack the Houthis and fulfill the treaty that way. But I have a feeling they're not deluded like Netanyahu, and they're not going to attack real estate. They're not going to worry about target assassinations. They're going to go kill the Houthis in bulk numbers. this stuff that Netanyahu's created is just moronic, and I don't know how he sold Trump on it, but I think Trump isn't going to follow that stuff anymore. People were talking about targeted assassinations and getting a new regime, getting rid of the Iranian government. Well, I don't see any signs of that working, do you? They're talking about there's, I don't know, a left and a right wing in Iran, whatever you want to call it, where they're clashing. But it also appears that the military's got the final decision, and they're not playing games, with the guys with the suits. They're finished listening to them. Now, Iran's talking about the largest missile barrage in history. This is the sheer idiocy that you get from, this isn't Netanyahu's doing, believe me, it's Trump's doing, sheer idiocy. That ceasefire, and now they rebuilt, so when they start up, it's going to be worse again. This character, Trump, doesn't understand that. I don't know why. I think you could teach it to a kid in the 8th grade. He doesn't understand it. He keeps trying to negotiate with them, and they don't do it. He doesn't understand it. But I think now his fear level is down. He's got his 3 aircraft carriers with their escorts. He's got a lot of other planes. He's got special forces. He's got more coming. They just took, this is interesting, they took a aircraft carrier. I forget the name of it. Maybe it's the Nimitz or something, which would make it a Nimitz class. And it had finished its last mission, and they were going to take it out of service. So what they frequently will do is dock the boat someplace, and all the sailors will leave, and they'll, kiss the boat goodbye and tell the boat how much they love it or whatever they're going to do. And then they'll dry dock they'll just tie the boat up, at a dock. And when they get around to it, they'll service the boat a little bit. They'll probably deactivate the weapons. They'll get any missiles and other offensive or defensive explosive weapons off the boat. They'll get the guns, the phalanx, the guns they have on there to shoot down incoming bogeys. They'll maybe leave the guns there, weld the barrel, and take all the ammo out. They'll probably empty the computers of any information. Anything that's, they'll just shut the computers, pull them out or whatever, or deactivate them, or just take all the software out of them so they're just sitting there, and make it look like, their control and command centers and intel and all that are there, and clean the boat up, paint it maybe and stuff, and make it look like a museum. And they'll run a cable from the land onto the boat, so they'll shut down all the engines and the generators, I think. And they may not keep fuel in the boat even, I don't know. And they'll power the boat from an electric cable in the land. Maybe they'll run that into the line that the generator feeds, or so, I don't know, something like that. And the boat will have air conditioning, it'll have heat, it'll have lights, and it'll have water and toilets and precious little anything else, maybe an intercom. And that's the elevators would work. Not much of anything. Then people go there and take a tour, and they'll ride on that fast elevator that moves the planes up and down. They'll see the dining room. They'll see the big bowl that's huge, like a jacuzzi or something, where they make soup for a few thousand people. That's what they'll do. Okay. And it'll be interesting. I took one of these self-guided tours once on an old World War II submarine. They did it as a museum in San Francisco. You paid, I don't know, this is a million years ago, $1 or $2 or something like that. And you got a device that talked to you. So you got a guided tour through the boat with the device. When it went into a different room on the submarine, it brought up the speaker talking about what was there in that room. And they do that with the aircraft carrier. So that now what happened is Trump stopped that and sent the thing down to Argentina. And the Falkland Islands, Britain has had fights with Argentina over the Falkland Islands, and they believe the Falkland Islands belong to the UK, and Argentina believes they're theirs. So Trump is not a friend of Stammer, or however you pronounce the guy's name, in the UK. So he sent that aircraft carrier down there to mess with the UK. He probably would. It's got planes and weapons. I mean, and escorts, and it's full boogie, ready to go fight. It's just probably so old that they think it's just time to put it to bed, because maintaining it is likely going to cost us way too much money, more than it's worth. It's better to take that money and put it into a new aircraft carrier and just get rid of this one. So he's going to irritate the UK. What's the UK going to do about it? Absolutely nothing. Nothing. Not a darn thing. That guy's a punk. He's a weak, spineless character. He's certainly no Winston Churchill. Forget about him. He'll just say, "Oh, let's just walk away from the Falklands and wait till Trump leaves office and then try again," something like that. Macron, surprisingly, is sitting there telling Greece, "Well, if you're really being threatened by Turkey, we're here." He's saying we're here for you. Can we really believe that Macron would go to war for anybody? I have a great deal of trouble believing that. Could he be promising that to Greece? Oh, yeah. Yeah. But it's an empty promise. Macron's a piece of garbage. So it's just another game. It doesn't mean anything. Macron is just barking. I don't think Greece is serious about it. A fight with Turkey would be a serious matter. And I don't think Macron's serious. I think if Turkey attacked Paris, there'd be a 50% chance Macron wouldn't fight. So, Macron leaves office soon. I don't know when, another year or two. He said that's it for him. He's out of politics. What does he do? I don't know what he does. They probably have a pension. Then he could probably subsidize that pension by giving speeches or sitting on the board of directors of some companies and that want to exploit his connections or something like that. But his connections probably have a lifespan of 4 to 8 years. That's it. But, some companies might give him $250,000, $500,000 a year to sit on the board of directors. And he could be getting that from 3 or 4 companies at the same time or more. So, the worst thing Iran could do now is attack Europe. That's why I think they might do it. First problem they got is if they hit a NATO country in Europe, that's Article 5. NATO automatically is going to come down and start bombing Iran. They'll negotiate with them if they can, and it won't go anywhere. It might lead to bombing them. If Iran says, I'm sorry, I should have known better, I apologize, I won't do it again, they won't do anything. And then if Iran does it again, maybe they'll do something. And Iran would likely do it again. Probably just hit a different country. Now, if they hit an EU country that's not in NATO, well, then they'll have the EU doing something similar to NATO. I think that we should expect this to happen with Europe, and we should expect Europe to fight. Trump has basically pulled in the kitchen sink in terms of military supplies, equipment, and soldiers. Not that many soldiers, but he's getting there. When America fought Iraq under old man Bush, around 90, 91 or someplace there, there was 6 aircraft carriers there, and I think 3 battleships. A battleship is something that doesn't exist anymore, other than it's a museum piece, They were pretty cool, but they're outdated. Their artillery was what they depended on. It had a maximum 25-mile range where missiles go hundreds of miles. So it was a pointless weapon to use because the enemy could fire at the battleship before the battleship even gets close to being in range. So simply put, an enemy vessel at 90 miles away could shoot all kinds of missiles at the battleship till they sink it. And the battleship has no way of attacking them. Okay. So the battleship was used in Vietnam that had no real navy. And it was some miles offshore, and it would be used to pound specific targets with their guns. Okay. They had 9 16-inch guns on the battleship. And these guns were shooting rounds of 2,000 pounds of explosives and less, of course. And it could destroy, a half of a city block anyway. Then they used them again in Iraq to pound shore installations. Again, Iraq didn't have an up-to-snuff navy. So these ships were not in danger. Iran doesn't have anything resembling a real navy. So Trump will be, likely to, walk all over Iran with his navy. But so they're saying now is the first time we had 3 aircraft carriers together at the same time in the Middle East. Yeah, well, if you go back to the war against Iraq with Saddam Hussein around 1990, 91, they had 6, I believe. And that still took a long time to beat that guy down. So the missing piece in Trump's equipment is still the Iwo Jima, which is that it's got about 2,500 Expeditionary Force Marines, and it's got 2 escort vessels, and that's like the small aircraft carrier with vertical takeoff planes and helicopters, and with the other ships carrying tanks and all sorts of stuff, landing craft and all that. But it'll be here in a few days. And I think the initial assault on Iran is very, very, very highly likely going to be massive bombings. What's going to be different this time? Well, Israel's definitely going to be in on it. And the United States is going to have a lot more aircraft. Okay. Probably between 300 and 400. And they can do significant bombings with Israel helping. Israel has an inventory of about 350 planes, warplanes. So between the two of us, there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of planes, i.e., that's why you're seeing a massive amount of refueling tankers. Where the warships are, by the Indian Oceans, Gulf of Oman and all that, they're going to need refueling to go back and forth. And Israel needs refueling to go back and forth. So, it looks like it's a go. Trump's got his 3 aircraft carriers. Somebody tried to assassinate him, although it was an Anglo-sounding name. Trump said he doesn't know if the guy was doing it over Iran, for sure, but he thought it was. I think it is too. The guy was a teacher in California. He had to have a screw loose to try something like that because the Secret Service just cut him down. you got to have very extensive, highly accurate vision and muscle coordination and be able to shoot extremely proficiently to be in the Secret Service. Let alone on a presidential detail. I think these guys go to the range probably twice a month while they're in a presidential detail, or even 4 times. I don't know. They go quite a bit. I don't know how many rounds they burn. I know that from my own experiences, if you go to the range, what I would do is try to go twice a month and burn 200 rounds each time, use up to. And that would keep me highly proficient, you know. Even once a month would keep me highly proficient. When you get, okay, this is what I learned, contrary to what most people would think or teach. When you get really proficient with guns, like you've shot 50, 60,000 rounds or something like that, you know, a huge amount of bullets, and you've been trained by professionals, okay, and you really understand what you're doing, okay, and you understand if you're missing, why you're missing. I mean, you got to be on a pretty high level with this, which I got to, and you could interchange guns. If I bought a new pistol, I would fire about 200 rounds, and then I'd usually go back another time in a few days and do another 200. And that would be it. I would have a proficiency with the gun. Now, when I learned how to shoot, when I was in law enforcement, we were using revolvers. We didn't have bulletproof vests. I mean, the SWAT guys had them, but you didn't wear them. You didn't have them. And we were using revolvers. We were using either 38 or 357. And the 357 was a great round, but it started falling out of favor because they started hiring women and they couldn't handle it. It really kicks. Now, we were using, to make the round really effective, we were using it was a Remington 125 grain semi-scalloped hollow point, or scalloped hollow point. And those rounds mushroomed, and they went 1,450 feet per second out of a 4-inch barrel. Now that's a whopper of a load, okay? And when you hit somebody with it, which I never did, but if you hit somebody with it, it was like they got hit by a 12 gauge slug or lightning or something like that. It stopped them. I mean, by a hit, you know, I mean, in here. Well, of course, a headshot too, but um, it stopped them. It got the hydrostatic shock. It mushroomed out. Usually, you know, you would get it out to as good as 7/10 of an inch, 0.70, right around there. Sometimes 0.8, sometimes 0.63, whatever. But I would say around 0.7, 7/10 of an inch. You got it opened up to, which is quite a bit. So you had a big wound channel. And it was really, really a potent round, okay? And but they couldn't handle it. They eventually came out with, I think Smith and Wesson still makes them, an 8-round revolver in 357, 8 shots. And I think if they had that back around 1968, 1970, 72, they would have just went to that, and they wouldn't have went off into the 9mm handguns so quickly. But that round was a really, really good round. And hunters were shooting 125-pound, wildcats with the thing, mountain lions, boom, and thing would drop like a ton of bricks. That's a tough animal. One round would drop it, So yeah, they got off of that because they were doing that. Then they started hiring people from other countries that were short. And, you know, it was leading to 5'2" women weighing 100 pounds, you know, getting into police work. And they were using the only thing they could really get them to shoot, which wouldn't jump out of their hands or something like that, would be 9mm pistols. And that is not a good round. The only way they make that round work is with high-tech bullets. If you use the basic bullet, which is a full jacket metal point, the round's a garbage round. You can put it into the person twice and they're still going to be shooting back at you. It's not a really good round at all. But they went to it, and they do use the fancy ammo, and it does work. It does work. Now they got different variants to this. They got the regular 9mm, and they got all the hollow point stuff you can put in there, and you're getting about 1150 feet per second, maybe 1200 or something like that, and it'll open up a hollow point, and it'll have some potency, and then you could get into the plus P, which is probably going to be 124 or 115 grain bullet, and you're probably going to be going at about 1250 feet per second, something like that. And again, you can put a hollow point in and you'll have, you know, it'll be more potent maybe. And then they got the plus P plus, which it ruins your gun usually if you use it at the range. So if you're going to go to the range and burn 200 rounds a month, you better buy two guns. So if you're going to use like a Glock 19 or something like that, get one that you take to the range, okay, and get an identical one that you don't take to the range, because you're going to wreck the gun. Okay. And that would probably be at about 1350, 1325 feet per second, which is not that bad. But remember that it's trying to mimic the 125 grain 357. Okay. The 9mm 357 are very similar in size, and the bullet weight can be identical, and they're trying to mimic the results, but you can't jack up the 9mm to go 125 grain bullet at 1450 feet per second. Your pressures are dangerous, and the gun could blow up and take pieces of your fingers and your hands. It's no good. So it's not good enough. You know, when you're doing a 357 revolver, you got a big cylinder, a big heavy metal cylinder in a heavy frame, and that cylinder can handle it. The guns don't really handle it that well. And you're looking at the guns are got a lot of plastic parts in them, you know, so they don't do good. If you buy a semi-automatic, you know, today I think you really got to buy one entirely made out of metal, because the Glocks are turning into crap. In the past, Sig Sauer has turned into crap, and then it became good, and then I don't know, it goes in and out. The Glocks got too much plastic. The early Glocks were rock solid. They took them in helicopters and threw them down in demonstrations, and they're more accurate than 99% of the shooters, or 99.9%. They're so accurate, you can't shoot as good as the gun can. Nobody really can get to the point where the gun's not good enough for them. I mean, the gun is highly, you know, cold hammer forged barrels and all sorts of stuff. It's very good. The trigger pulls can vary, And the guns are not, in my opinion, they're not safe. They don't have a safety. They say they do. It's cock and bull story. You know, you'd be, I think, nuts to carry one of those in your pocket without a holster. Okay, nuts, because it could, something could go wrong. So if I carried one in my pocket, I'd put it in a pocket holster so I didn't have to worry about the trigger getting pushed or something like that. And you run into those problems with, most of the uh, semi-automatics, unless you get one that you could, have a safety where you lock a lever and all that, and that's like a 45 or something like that. They're not easily found, but they do exist. So yeah, this 9mm is a craze all over the world. Israel uses it. I know a lot of times people shoot the terrorist civilians with pistols, and you got to shoot them generally multiple times because they're using full metal jacket ammo here. It's crap. It's stupid. They should buy a gun that's 10mm is a pretty good round. You get 170 grain bullet. You could get 1,300 feet per second, usually something like that. It's not 1450, but it's a heavier bullet and it's potent. It's a stopper. They use it on heavy game, even bears. You know. Um, 44 Magnum is an excellent round. If you go back to the 70s, when people in Alaska were running around worrying about the bears, and they got special loose gun laws in Alaska, and they were buying Ruger semi-automatic pistols, usually with the big barrel, like 7.5 inch, sometimes 6 inch, and they had shoulder holsters where the gun wasn't under your arm; it would be like here, so they could pull the gun out. And there was a lot of shootings of big grizzly bears with these 44 Magnums, and they were using the 240 grain bullet. They had different configurations, and they were killing the bears with these, and they weren't complaining. It was working, you know. And the kick on that isn't that bad. It isn't. Not if you got a big. If you buy the, and I've done this, and it's, I think it was a 2.5 or 3 inch Smith and Wesson. I had one of those. I can't remember if it was 2.5 or 3 inches. I had one a long time ago, like 35 years, 40 years ago, and it had the porting to reduce the recoil, and it was 5 or 6. I think it was 6 shots. It was a big thing, and oh man, that sucker was rough. But if you got the 6 inch barrel, it really tamed it. You know, the gun wouldn't rise that much. The 7.5 is already so big that if you're trying to get a steady hold, you might have trouble with the weight of the gun. 6 inch was enough. And they started making more convenient versions of these in recent years, where they were anywhere from 3 inches, 3.5, 4 inches, stuff like that. And 4 inches is still powerful. Then I bought one called the 454 Cazul. A Cazul. My gosh. That thing was a monster. You could get a 300 grain bullet, which is what you're normally going to use to shoot a moose or something, right? A 300 grain bullet going over 1,300 feet per second out of that thing. I used to make my own ammo for that. And oh my gosh, that would split skin. The grips would crack your skin open. I used to shoot it at the range. They didn't care. I told them what I had, and they said, "No, just shoot it. It won't matter." And it didn't. And I would be able to maybe get. It was 5 shots. Maybe I'd get all 5 shots off, and that was my practice session. I couldn't keep it up. It was. It was too much. You know, it was too much. It was just. I could have made rounds that were 250 grains and 1,200 feet per second, and it would have been maybe easier. Once they were robbing, I was living in this town in Florida, and they were a city actually, and they were robbing restaurants. And I used to eat in restaurants. So I said to myself, I don't want to go through this. They're robbing people, taking their wallet. Give me your watch, give me your ring, give me a diamond ring, all this. I didn't want to go through that crap. They'll smack you with the gun, and you could, something could go wrong with your head, or, I don't want to put up with these idiots. So I said to myself, well, I was big on using revolvers then and Glocks. And I said, well, I'll still keep my Glock with me, but when I go to eat out, I'm going to put a shoulder rig on and bring my casoul, And I said to myself, well, it's overkill, but when you shoot them with a 300 grain bullet at 1,300 feet per second, you're not going to have any problems with, the guy's still standing and shooting. Not if you get anywhere in the torso. The guy's going to go out like a light, So I was going to the restaurants with my hand cannon if they came in when I was there. And, before I walked in the restaurant, I'd look in the window, make sure everything was normal. Before I would ever walk into a bank in America, by the way, you might want to do this. I would look in the window, either through the door, I'd stick my head to the side of the door, look in. And if there's a robbery, you'll see things that are going to make you know there's a robbery. And I would just peek in before I'd go in a bank, because they had bank robberies there, I wasn't that worried with the supermarket. When I parked my car in the supermarket, if I saw people exiting the supermarket, I knew it was okay. If they're doing a supermarket robbery, which they used to do, I was Tallahassee, Florida. If they were doing the supermarket robbery, nobody's leaving. People could be going in, but nobody's going out, Like the Roach Motel, they check in, but they don't check out, because they're not letting anybody go in and see the robbery and leave, because they're going to turn their phone on. Help, help, So, you might want to use those tips, because society has deteriorated quite a bit. You go into a bank, peek in through the window before you walk in. The last thing you want to do is walk in on a robbery in a bank. They're going to get spooked. A lot of times they close the door, but that's not the best for them. They get the people in the bank to lock the door. But then somebody comes, let's say it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they know the bank's open till 3 all the time, year after year, and they go in and it's closed, and they look in and they see people there. They're going to go back to the car, pick up the phone, and call the sheriff. And then he's going to send 6 or 8 guys there, and they're going to surround the place, and then you're going to have a hostage situation, and you're going to have negotiators, and, it's a real mess, So what they'll do instead is they'll leave the door open, and they'll have a guy on the side, and when the people come in, they pull a gun on them and, have them sit on the floor or lay down or whatever they're going to do with them. Okay. So, yeah, these guys with the restaurant eventually got caught. They were going into restaurants, sticking the place up, going table to table, getting the wallets and money and purses and everything from the people, and then running out. I didn't need that. They had a public supermarket there. I remember this one. It got robbed just before Christmas. I don't know if it was December 24th or the 22nd, the 23rd, something like that. I don't remember. And they came in, and there was a team, and they went in there and they started emptying the cash registers, which were about 5 or 6. Each cash register had several $1,000s. They couldn't get into the safe. The safe is usually by a window so people could see them breaking into the safe. So the safe is by a window, and they weren't going to break in. And they were making people sing jingle bells and lay down on the floor. And they were coming around taking their wallet and the stuff. And they had a highway patrolman in there, Florida highway patrolman in there with his gun and his badge and everything. And he just gave him the wallet like anybody else, and they never knew what it was. He was afraid to start up with them because he couldn't see where all of them were. They were all working in different parts of the store, robbing different things. So if he started shooting one, he had a good chance of getting killed because he was outnumbered. So then after that one, they started robbing banks. I don't know if it was the same people or whoever it was, and they would go into the banks and rob the whole bank. Now that's an FBI offense, and generally the FBI will show up and tell the people how sorry they are, take statements, look at the cameras, get whatever they can get out of it, write a report, and they generally do nothing. They wait for the local police to catch them. If there's a robbery in progress and you're in a city where they got a good amount of FBI agents, they will get notified, usually by the alarm at the bank, as well as the police. And they'll get on the radio and talk to all their agents and say, get over to this bank, robbery in progress, caution, And the FBI agents are usually going to be gung-ho, but they're not going to walk into a robbery where there's 2 agents because they don't have control, and they're not going to get control, and they could get killed, and the people inside could get killed. So they will wait for the police to show up or more FBI agents, and then they'll try to do something. Anyway, so Hezbollah fired 2 rockets from Lebanon at us, hitting northern Israel. And there were no injuries, but that's the end of the ceasefire. And then after that happened, which was yesterday, Netanyahu is hitting Lebanon, or Hezbollah in Lebanon, heavily. So the ceasefire with Hezbollah is, got rigor mortis already. Now, this morning, I heard my window rattle twice, and my wife heard it. We didn't know what it was. We didn't feel the pressure in our ears, which means it wasn't that close. When you get a big explosion, like it could be heavy artillery, bombs, or missiles, or drones, you feel the pressure in your ear, unless all your windows are closed. But in this case, my window was wide open. I didn't feel it. And I just felt the window rattle briefly. the doors weren't rattling, and I didn't feel it in the ground or the house. So my wife and I were talking about it. What was that? And I said, well, it's probably up at northern Lebanon. Then I found out what happened is the Hezbollah got a new kind of missile that's very short range with a big warhead. So they were probably shooting these up at the north. I heard 2 rattles, so that could have been the 2. And they had a big warhead, so I felt the rattle from the explosion. I'm pretty far away from there. It would take me almost an hour to drive up there. It's coming out now that Iran caused more damage to the American military bases in the Middle East than is publicly known. The bases and equipment across the Middle East came under attack from the Iranians. And the repairs are likely going to cost billions, and that could be one of the contributing factors to Trump wanting the ceasefire. Although he had to know it would give Iran a chance to rebuild, he might have needed it also. And he might have felt he didn't have enough aircraft here with 1 aircraft carrier. So he's got to have a lot more. U.S. Air Force refueling tankers have been spotted flying over the Straits of Gibraltar towards the Middle East. Straits of Gibraltar is where you go from the Atlantic Ocean into the Mediterranean. So they're coming from somewhere. America, I suppose. And I suppose if they're schlepping huge amounts of fuel, they could refuel themselves, if you will. That's a bad way of saying it. Their fuel pumps can probably pump from their tanks to refill other planes, their own, they could probably shift it over from the big tank that they used to refill other planes. They can probably shift the gas over to the regular tanks in the wings or wherever they are and run that way. And they're big planes, and they could put several guys in there, and they probably have a cot somewhere they could lay down and rotate and go to sleep, stuff like that. Although it's not that big a deal. From the East Coast to Tel Aviv is, I don't know, 8 hours or something like that. I think some flights do it in 7, if I'm not mistaken. They might even be as little as 7. So they probably don't need to go to sleep. The pilot and the co-pilot, they probably take breaks, shift back and forth. They got an autopilot, I'm sure. Yeah, it's actually the Dwight D. Eisenhower aircraft carrier that's gone down to Argentina. That was the one that they were going to retire. Eisenhower was a big figure 80, 85 years ago or something like that, with the war, The IRGC is telling the Americans to accept the reality and stop being the dependent on Netanyahu's policy. Yeah, Trump's Bible bought into Netanyahu's crap with the targeted assassinations and blowing up the real estate. Look how much real estate they blew up in Iran. Did it work? No. And targeted assassinations, did that work? No. Did the combination of blowing up the real estate and targeted assassinations work with Iran? No. It's stupid. It's a way to conduct a war that you don't really want to wipe out your enemy. Then the Iranians go on to say that the only choice the Americans have is a rapid and unconditional withdrawal from the region, the Middle East. And they were emphasizing that control over the Strait of Hormuz will remain a strategic pressure tool in the hands of the Iranians against Washington and its allies. So they're basically saying this is our, prevention from you attacking us again. Will shut down the Straits of Hormuz and the fuel prices will go up. Look, the fuel prices are not that high right now. I checked them a little while ago. Your WTI American is 94 a barrel, and your Brent is 105, which is about $30 a barrel, $35 than where they normally would have the oil. But that's a lot of money. It's like about a 50% bump up. Gold was 47.08 and silver 75. Not much going on there. Now, the people in the world haven't really woken up to the fact that there were no negotiations and Iran just happened to be going to Pakistan for a different reason. And, it's Sunday and people are asleep at the wheel and they're not really understanding much, But they're probably going to wake up tomorrow and then we're going to see the prices spike again. That's for sure. So the sirens went off 6 different times in the last 24 hours, and then Netanyahu's office announced that Netanyahu has instructed the IDF to strike Hezbollah targets in Lebanon with force. Well, he's sending them after to retaliate. We're retaliating, and we're hitting them very hard. Netanyahu, in my opinion here, we're not going to wipe out Hezbollah. That'll happen when we get into redemption. But, or the day of vengeance will probably do it. So the 2 witnesses will take them out. But they're going to keep getting bombed by Israel, and their ability to launch missiles is going to go down, 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 down. And it's not going to happen anymore. Let's see. That's usually what we see. So don't worry that much about the Russian drone crash landing or falling down on Romanian soil. It's going to lead nowhere. I'd be shocked, incredibly shocked, if NATO turns around and says, "Oh, we're going to do an Article 5. I don't believe it. Is it possible that Putin's playing a game and, he really sent it in? I doubt it, because the drone didn't do anything, didn't accomplish anything like getting damaged or anything. I doubt it. It was probably a mistake. The drone could have got wounded or, damaged in flight, and then it just went out of control, got shot at, and they lost control. Okay. The drone was found. No, sorry, that was a different drone. So the drone in Romania was found by the Danube River, near the border with Ukraine, Romania, all right. I don't know who's got the intel that Iran is trying to put together a very large, record-breaking missile attack, but it sure sounds like it's something they would try. And will Trump and Israel short circuit it? I think they will. Now there's a war in Mali. Okay. I'm not even sure where Mali is. Let's find out. I don't know anybody who's from Mali or ever went to Mali, Mali. I don't know much about it. Let's find out where it is. Where is Mali, Mali? What countries does it share a border with? Let's take a look. It's in West Africa. It has no coastline, so it's not on the water. It sits in the Sahel region, which doesn't mean Sahel, doesn't mean anything. Okay, it borders Algeria, Niger, Burkina. Okay, so it's sort of northern Africa, kind of central. Okay, I imagine it's a small country. Anyway, it's getting a complicated war thing going on there. But it's complicated. I'll explain. it's like a three-way thing going on, like a three-way war or struggle amongst the different factors here. Okay. There's the Mali military government. Um, then there's what's called the Tuareg, Tuareg, separatists, who want an independent state in the north. So they want to do a breakaway from big Mali to little Mali that they control in the north. And then we have radical Islamic groups who want to impose Sharia law across the region. So there's Muslim terrorists mixed into this thing. Surprise, surprise. Who would ever think people like that would get involved in a war? Oh my God. So you got attacks, and it's not a good situation, and I don't know who's going around trying to calm it down, if anybody, and it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. People are way distracted right now with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East. They're not too interested in these type of things. Let me take a look at the live stream real quick. Then we'll check price of gasoline, which ought to be interesting. When I was a deputy sheriff, I got trained with guns. Someone was asking me. I didn't think the training was very good. Back then, I'm an old man, okay? So back then, we were not using bulletproof vests, we were using revolvers, and we were point shooting like this, not like this. And we would put one hand up here so the bullet would have to hit our hand before it got our heart. And we would squat and we'd have the point shooting. Now, point shooting's easier than a lot of people think it is, and it can work. And in an emergency, I could still do it. It's not hard. This part of your arm has to stay level with the ground, parallel. That's the key, because then you're going to go straight. If it's not, you're going to overshoot or you'll undershoot. Okay? Controlling it this way is very easy. You got to train yourself to keep the hand parallel. And then you poke the gun at the person like you want to stick the gun in their belly or something, right? You want to push the barrel of the gun into them, and then you squeeze. So if you've got your arm parallel to the ground, you're going to have some altitude because you're only squatting a little bit. You're trying to make your target shorter. Now, this has been proved to be no good. Okay, the way I would shoot today is like this, and I would only use the front sight. And this putting the hand in front of the heart business is, when you're dealing with back in the 20s, 1920s, and a lot of the bullets were 32s, and not 38 special, 38s, and lower powered ammo, it would probably have some good effect. But when you're dealing with high speed ammo, it wasn't going to do that much. And that, so that was how they were teaching us back then. And a man named Jeff Cooper worked the system. He's a retired colonel, and he had a shooting range. I don't remember the name of it anymore, out in Arizona. And his range master came to when I was in California and taught 2 courses. One was 5 days, one was 3 days, and I took all 8 days with him, and he turned me around. He was a Jewish guy, and he was from South Africa, and I'm Jewish, and he knew I was Jewish, and he kept his eye on me to make sure I figured out what I was doing. He was also keeping his eye on a lot of other people. It was pretty good. A guy stood next to me at this that used to be a U.S. Marshal. He got fired, and he put a round in the ground about 2 feet away from me by mistake. He was a real jackass. So you got to watch yourself at these sessions. So, I go to the guy, I said, wow, that scared me. And he goes, yeah, it scared me too. I felt like I wanted to haul off and smack him for that, but I didn't, I mean, he was a real jerk. What happened is he was a U.S. Marshal. I knew people who knew him, and I found out his background. And he was watching a mafia guy, okay, protecting him. Not the guy was like state's witness, and he was protecting him. And the guy wanted to go to church on Sunday, Catholic church. So he drove him up there, and he knew the guy wasn't going to go anywhere. So he let the guy go in the church, and then he fell asleep in the car waiting for him, and something happened, and they fired him. Oh, what a jerk! I knew another guy I knew of him. He was a transit cop in New York, and he fell asleep on a platform. And they saw him, and he got reported, and they were going to fire him. He had to really pull strings with connections and stuff to keep his job. They fire you for that, I mean, if you're really so tired that you can't stay awake, you should call in sick. Or if you go to start your shift and you find yourself you can't keep yourself up awake, well, your first rule is try 2 cups of coffee, and probably 75-80% of the time that's going to do it. But if you're not, you can say you're sick on the shift and get relieved. You don't fall asleep. But a lot of the cops around the United States in the old days, and I don't know if they still do it, they had jobs. They'd get a night shift and they'd have a day job. And when they went on night shift, what they would do is 3 or 4 patrol cars would collect together at a point, out of the way somewhere, like on grass, not on a road, And they would put their cars together, and one of them would stay up on watch to make sure they didn't get killed while he was sleeping in their car. And they'd all go to sleep they wouldn't sleep for long. They'd sleep for maybe they'd get away with 2 hours or 3 hours at the most, And that's not nice. But they, would get away with it. This was pretty profound. I know that there were cops in New York during, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. They would, if they were in a neighborhood in Brooklyn or wherever, and they had a okay, and they had a they'd share an apartment. these characters would share an apartment, and they'd be on foot patrol in these neighborhoods, right? So they would just walk up into the apartment, right? And they'd go in there and they'd take a nap, you know. This is before they had radios. Before they had cell phones, you know. So then I went after, you know, I was out of law enforcement. I went to the training course. This guy, his name was Robbie Barkman. I know he's probably deceased by now. And he was a commando in South Africa. And I took his course, and then he really taught me how to shoot. He used to, you know, in front of the class, he'd sit there and he'd have me, you know, trying to work on my squat. I'd sit there and look him, and he'd say that in front of the whole class, he'd kid around me and say, "Oh, you're eating too many blintzes," and stuff like that, you know. So he got me going, you know, and he taught me that you could take the 45 pistol, the semi-automatic, the one the military used to use, and you could shoot it at 100 yards and hit people. I don't ever practice that. You know, the thing is, if you're a civilian and you practice that and then you actually use it on somebody, they're going to sit there and ring you up the flagpole, because how are you going to prove your life was being threatened? If the guy had a rifle, yes. But if the guy didn't have a rifle, you know, you could get in a lot of trouble with that. You got to watch yourself. Yeah, the guys in Alaska were using the 357. That would be good for wolves, maybe at most the little bears. But when you know, moose can be very aggressive and dangerous. But if you're talking about a 1,200-pound moose or a 1,200-pound grizzly bear, you know, the 44 Magnum was, I would say, minimum effective. For something like that, you'd probably want a 50 Smith & Wesson or a 454 Casull would be pretty good. You really should have a rifle. You know, a 30-30 does a good job, for instance. A lot of rifles, you know, I know a guy that, you know, I didn't know him well, but I knew him. He was in Montana or Wyoming, and he was worried about critters over there, and he didn't bother with a big pistol. He just took a rifle. They got these 50 caliber lever action rifles they sell, that is a big round, a heavy round, and it's not going to go that slow, but it's not going to go 3,000 feet a second either. And it's very effective against the bear. When you're using a grizzly bear, you want a solid round. You don't want hollow points. You want the thing to penetrate in, and you're going to probably want to pump a few rounds into that sucker, because he's got, you know, an adrenal gland the size of 5 pounds of coffee or something, you know. His adrenaline's gonna go, he's gonna go wild. So you got to lay a few rounds in him, whatever you're shooting. But usually the 44 Magnum would be 2 shots, you know. 44 Magnum is very, very powerful. You could stop cars with it if you hit the engine. I mean, they're really powerful. The soldiers in Vietnam, the Americans were buying them because you couldn't get them. When I was a deputy, I tried like crazy to get my hands on a 44 Magnum as a deputy sheriff, and I couldn't even get one. They were going to the soldiers in Vietnam. They weren't generating that many of them, Smith & Wesson. And the Viet Cong guys and the guerrillas in Vietnam were hiding behind trees and plinking at the U.S. soldiers. So they would shoot. The trees aren't like, like this in America. They're like this, or maybe like that, more or less like this, skinny, and they 44 Magnum would go right through the tree and hit them standing behind the tree. There were little guys, skinny little guys that could hide behind the tree pretty good. And they would just fire right through the tree and the thing would go right through and get them. Well, when you were trying to do this with a 223.223 or a 5.56, the AR-16 or the 15, well, they had a 16. It didn't go through trees very well. You're talking the 55 grain bullet that's tumbling. It wasn't effective. So they got the 44 Magnums and they were blowing the enemy up, standing behind the tree. That thing could slice through a 6-inch tree real easy. A lot of the rounds they used would be a half jacket, and then it was a piece of lead in front of that, and it mushroomed a little bit, it's still around. It's still a good gun, Ruger makes an especially really nice one. Double action, revolver, not that big. There was a guy, he called the gun of all things the Grizzly. I had one of these once, probably 40 years ago or something. He called it the Grizzly. The guy's probably dead, but these things are probably still out there. They're built like, is that the Grizzly? I think it. No, I am confusing it. That was a 50 caliber. This was it was called a 45 Magnum. And it was built just like a military 45, except it was about 25-30% larger. So it was a regular full-size 45 on steroids. And it was a darn good gun. It didn't jam. It was big, but you could conceal it. And what it did is it shot this 230 grain bullet projectile, the bullet, but the shell was much bigger, and it fired it at about 1450 feet per second, something like that. So it was shooting, a regular 45 ACP, not the plus P stuff, is about 850 feet per second. This could have been 1350. I can't remember. Something like 1350, 1450. And it was almost double the bullet weight of a 357, the 125 grain, almost twice as big. So this thing was a powerhouse, and I think he called it the Grizzly, if I remember correctly. He made it to shoot bears, and it would shoot a bear. I mean, you had a 44 Magnum, basically, in a semi-automatic, and it had, I think the clip was 6+1. It could have been 7+1, but I think it was 6+1. These were big, heavy shells. And I had one, and I'd use it if I heard noises in the backyard. I'd go out, I'd bring the flashlight, I'd bring that, because if you shot somebody with that, it could say they stayed shot, I was not anywhere near where they saw a grizzly bear in a century. I'm in California. Yeah, they didn't see any grizzly bears there in a gazillion years, But it'd be for two-legged critters. But it was an easy gun to shoot. But I got a hand like a meat hook. I'm a big guy, and I got a big hand, and I got I could hold that thing. Not everybody could. The gun itself was 40-something ounces, something like 48. It was a heavy, heavy gun. It was all metal, and I just shoot with the front sight with that. And if you were, no more than 50 feet away, and you were just using the front sight, it was pretty darn accurate, And It didn't jam her, and no problem. A lot of these 45s would jam. You had to work them. You had to go get them. Even the Colts, whoever they made them, they out of the box. They were no good. You had to take them in and get them gunsmith. But then later in the years, like the 90s, they started making guns that actually worked. A company called Kimber made great government 45s at the time. Then they didn't get so great. They made them and they told you had to shoot them 200 times to break them in. So I bought some of the deluxe models. This is when I was working in the world, I had plenty of money, and I'd go to the range with them, and I'd shoot about 400 rounds, and then it would be, after that, smooth as butter, perfect. Then this company was in Westchester, and then in New York, and then they got lousy. And you'd buy the gun and you'd shoot it, and it would jam. And that was, I don't know why they were selling crap like that, but it was crap. And then I heard they got away from that and they started making them better again. But then Heckler and Koch came out with a I think they called it USP, fantastic full-size 45 ACP, 12 in the clip, 1 in the chamber, all metal, pretty big, not that big, but big. Double action, you could set it double action first shot, then single action. You could set it on single action, put the safety up. It was a great gun. I mean, that was the way to go if you wanted to shoot 45, was that. It outdid the 45 military version, it outdid it. Put them to shame. If you're going to go into really precise shooting, that's like not combat shooting, like target shooting, you might do better with the government model. If you get it all worked on by a gunsmith who knows what he's doing, but I used to see guys at the range with these things, and they would have the thing all worked up. This would be back in the 70s, and they would sit there with one arm. And the range was, how many feet? I think it was 25 feet. Was it 25 yards? It could have been 25 yards, actually. I don't remember. It wasn't very long. Maybe it was 25 feet. I can't remember. It's been decades. And they'd sit there with these things, with the hand in the pocket or something, like they did in World War II target shooting. And they would sit there and boom, boom, they enjoyed that. Fine, good for them. Have a good time. I didn't mind. I didn't know what they personally. I don't know what they saw in it, but they liked it. That range that I used to see them at was annoying. They didn't want you doing any rapid fire, so they didn't want you learning combat shooting. So I used to go to another range on the other side of the bay, near, what was it? Contra Costa County had a range in the middle of nowhere. You had to be careful. This range was out in the middle of nowhere. It had a range master. I don't know if he lived out there or he just worked out there. I can't remember. I don't think he lived there. And he kept a pretty good eye on the place. And it was really like out in the wilderness. You could go there. So when I went there, I mean, even though he was there, I always kept the gun with rounds in it right next to me or in my pocket or something, or wore it in a holster. So if, the gun I'm shooting is empty, I wasn't helpless, And they didn't care what you did over there. So you could go boom, 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 boom. Yeah, they didn't care. Shoot as fast as you want. They didn't care what you did, They had the pie plates, which are pie plates is they make a rail. It looks like a thing you would, in a Western movie, tie your horse up to. It's on wood, And the pie plate is about like this. They got all different sizes, like 6, 9 inches usually. It's made out of a special strong metal, and it's on a piece of steel like this, a square piece of steel. And they usually put, maybe 6 of them up on this post of wood, and you can, after you knock them down, you go back and you push them back up. They usually have a rope you can pull and they all go up. And I was shooting it with 9mm. I remember I tried a 9mm pistol to see what this thing would do, right? And I was hitting the pie plates. You hit ping, ping, right? And you'd see a little movement of the pie plate, but it wouldn't fall over. That's how weak they are. You take a 38 special, just the standard, you hit it, boom, the pie plate smacks down. 357 smacks down. 45, it smacks down. 380, I never owned one. I didn't believe in them. The 32, I owned the 32 when I was a kid. It was a James Bond 32 caliber Beretta. I'll get a Bond gun. And it's a very, very anemic gun. It's, it's not very good. Yeah. So the 9mm, these were full metal jackets. I think they were 115 grain. Standard military round wouldn't knock the pie plate over. So that's the acid test right there. The round's anemic. And they put all the police on this. Stupid. They put the military on it. Stupid. They were doing it so women could shoot. That's why they did it. Now, the 38 Special was an especially not a good round. The New York police used it for 50, 60 years, 70 years, I don't know. They bounce off windshields. Regular car, like a Chevy Impala or something like that, and you shoot the windshield. Windshields are curved and all that. These are slow rounds. They're solid lead. They're, 158 grain. They're going about 900 feet per second, and they would bounce off a windshield. Oh, they would chip it and make damage to the glass, but it wouldn't go in. And cops are sometimes have to shoot at windshields. What if the guy's aiming at you with his car? Like you want to do a Dirty Harry, put your 44 Magnum down and shoot the guy in the car. Dirty Harry in the movies said that he didn't shoot 44 Magnums out of his 44 Magnum Smith & Wesson. He shot 44 specials, which if you're going to hunt people, that's fine with, that's the same bullet, but much slower, and the recoil is much less. I think that you could be down 900, 800, 900 feet per second, 1,000. They have them all different flavors today, but it's a decent round. But you don't. I mean, why are you using the 44 Magnum? As a cop, it doesn't lend itself for that. The only thing that's good for is if you're dealing with somebody that's coming up on you with a car, and the car might be armored. Most of the time the car will, the armored car is going to stop a 44 Magnum most of the time. But you see, there's different ways you armor a car. If you don't armor the engine compartment, it'll go break the guy's engine. If you shoot him in the tires, even if he's got run flats, it's probably going to rip it up, especially after 2 bullets in the tires, so you can disable them. Today, they bulletproof cars where you're going to stop a 50 caliber, or you're going to stop armor-piercing pistol bullets or armor-piercing AK-47 and stuff like that. People buy them, and the windows are 2 inches thick. That's like this. Okay? And they're going to put a few thousand pounds of weight on the car. Yep. Because they got to do the roof. Otherwise, the guys just stand up and shoot down at you through the roof. So you got to get the roof armored. Okay? The windshield's going to be 2 inches thick at least, maybe 3.5. You get some distortion from the windshield, but it's not that bad. What they do to save weight is let's say you get an SUV and you got that rear compartment there where you put the suitcases and you got 3 rows of seats. So right after the 3rd row of seat, what they'll put up there is a window that's going to be 2 inches thick of bulletproof glass, so you could see out if you want to use your mirror and see out the back. Or if you don't care about that, they'll put probably about a 1/2-inch steel plate in there. But then they'll mount it with metal very firmly in there. So if somebody's shooting at you through the back of your SUV, it's going to hit this metal or glass plate and not get into the passenger compartment. So that luggage area, they don't protect it. So the roof up there is probably not armored because it's no vulnerability. Nobody's sitting back there. The glass in that portion may not be armored, okay? And the floor plan, the bed, the bottom may not be armored, and the door in the back isn't armored. So what does that do? Well, it saves a lot of weight. You see, they're trying to save weight. Then they do the same thing in the front. The front side fenders, they don't armor it, okay? The tires, yeah, they're armored, They're not armored, they're, run flat. They try to get you about 25 miles with those, but with such a heavy car, you probably only get 5 to 10 miles, but you can get out of danger with them. It's enough distance to get away. If you're in a city or something, you'll get away. The front, the grill and all that stuff's not armored. The bumpers aren't armored, okay? The floor plan under the motor is not armored. They don't armor the motor. What they usually do is they put armor around the battery, which is no big deal. They just get some steel plates or use a synthetic or something and just put it around the battery. So if someone shoots in, they're not going to be able to get the battery. The engine block, if they're using a really powerful bullet, they'll damage the engine. But if they're just shooting a 9mm at you or something like that, it's not going to do very much of anything to your engine. It could hit certain things in the car, but they don't armor that. The hood's not armored, so they save weight. So the only thing they're armoring is the floor plan under the passenger compartment, the roof over the passenger compartment, the doors, the windshield, and the windows surrounding the car where the passengers are. So they save weight that way. But it's still, when you start armoring like this, because they use 50 calibers now to break into these cars. And you really got to go crazy to stop it. 2-inch thick glass will stop it. Because it's not regular glass, it's some different thing. Now, getting a motor to put your windows up and down is insane with these things. Your motor on your regular car, your windows, something maybe like this big. These are like this, or even bigger. They're a huge motor because the glass is so heavy. When you put the window down with the electric, now they do it different ways. Some of them will stop the window going down more than 3 or 4 inches, okay, just to get air in the car. So your head is theoretically still behind the glass, okay, but somebody could stick their gun in the window and shoot everybody in there. So a lot of people want a real window, so it goes down, right? All right. So the motor, the way they set these things up is when you put the window down, it goes down slow. But when you push it up, there's a position, I think there's two up positions or something. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just one. One position brings the window up slow, and then you got another one where whoop, it gets the window up fast. So if you got windows down, you could put it up fast. But the makers of these armored cars don't usually suggest that it's a good idea to put the windows down, and they would like you to have just a little opening for air or something like that. Here's what's really wrong with these cars, though. They're so heavily armored. Let's say you had an accident, okay, and you can't get out of your car. The firemen come, right? They start hitting the windows with an axe. What happens? They break the axe before they break the window. I don't know. Maybe that's not true, but they're not getting in. And then they get the jaws of life, like to open up the doors, and that works on regular cars, but it ain't going to work on this because they got probably 3/4 inch to 1 inch hardened steel plate in these things. You might die in your car. I'll be back in a minute. They don't tell you this. So when these big shot millionaires want to feel secure, like in New York City or someplace else, they usually don't bother you about getting a bulletproof car. They get these overkill armored cars, and if you have an accident, you're dead. They put special locks on the doors with these things. So if you come with a pry bar and try to pry the door open, you can't. The door's solid, heavy steel, armor steel, and they become prisoners in their own car. They used to build them, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. They'd make shooting ports in the car where you had it was a hole in the door, but it wasn't a real hole. On the other side of the shooting port, there was, regular car sheet metal. they didn't have any armor there. There was like a tunnel, maybe like this. And inside the car, they had a thick piece of metal that would lock over the hole. So if a bullet happened to hit that weak steel part, it would hit the big piece of metal in the car and it wouldn't get in. So they would flip that, they'd open the hinge and move that thing open and then shoot, and the first shot would rip open the regular sheet metal. And then they would start shooting at the guys, assaulting them. But I don't know why they stopped making these years ago. I don't understand it. They don't do it anymore. Maybe there's, I don't know. I just don't understand it. They used to put ports on each door. They just don't do it anymore. I know that if you had the port and these guys were coming over to try to work at your car, get you out of your car, and you started shooting at them from the gun ports, they would have to run away. They couldn't sit there. You know, it's a very time-sensitive maneuver they do. You're driving around in an urban area usually, and what they'll do is take a big garbage truck or some really big heavy truck and pull it out in the road in front of you and get you trapped, and then you're going to try to get out behind you, but they'll have other guys with their cars. You ain't getting out from behind, so now you're jammed up. Okay, then the idea, this is how they're always going to do it. They'll jam you up, otherwise it doesn't work. Now you're in your armored car, and you might have bodyguards in the area. You might have 2 escort cars with you that are bodyguards. Sometimes they're just as heavily armored, often they are. And now the bad guys that want to get you out of there and assassinate you, maybe you're a head of a corporation or something like that, kidnap you or whatever they want to do to you, they got to get you out of the car. First of all, they're not sure which car you're in. Are you in the first car, the second car, or the third car? Because that's how these guys travel. They'll have identical cars. The color, the model, everything will be identical, including the armoring. So you don't know which one they're in, okay? So that makes it very difficult for probably 90% of the attackers, because they're not going to assemble a big team to take something like this on. Now, if you're shooting at them through your gun ports, they're going to run away. You see, this is like, I think it was idiotic that they got rid of the gun ports, because you could put the window down 1.5 inches or 2 inches and start shooting. But if they get close to you, they could shoot into the car. Well, that's not such a great idea. So, you know, this is a bad problem, you know. What they'll do is they come up to the car and they'll try hitting it and with items that they don't know what kind of armor you got. And then they have a 50 caliber and they just start shooting at the window, and it might stop the first 2 or 3 rounds of the 50 caliber. But if you just keep shooting and shooting, by the time you get to in a small area, you put several rounds in there, it's going to break the window down. So you would just go boom, 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 and, eventually the window breaks. Could you do it with a lesser gun like an AK-47 on full auto? Yeah, you probably could if you dropped the 40-round clip in a little circle. My guess is you'd probably break it down, but maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. Depends whose glass they bought. If you got the really good stuff, no, it wouldn't break. It might. I don't know. Everything has a breaking point, So then once they break a hole in there, the people give up, because they tell them, come out or we're just going to start shooting through the hole. They surrender. So if you had the shooting ports, they'd have a lot of trouble doing that. And I don't know why they took the shooting ports away. There had to be a reason. I don't know what it is. I suppose you could custom, insist they do it, and they probably would. Um, I don't know why they wouldn't. I imagine they would. You know. So there's all kinds of stuff, that they do. So what most people do is they get a car. Frequently, it's an SUV, and they armor it for 9 millimeter. It goes up to 44 Magnum, right? And it stops shotguns, and it doesn't stop rifles. It's just for pistols. It stops most pistols. It's not going to stop a 50 Smith and Wesson or a special or 454 Casull or these very high-powered pistols, which you're very, very unlikely to ever encounter. The bad guys are usually running around with stolen weapons, and they don't know how to use these other weapons where they don't get the ammo. They don't have the ammo. It doesn't work. They want a Glock or a Smith and Wesson or something like that, a Heckler and Koch, a 6 hour, and they'll call, and the window glass isn't going to break. So if somebody, you're driving around in a big city and somebody wants to carjack you and they point the gun at you, so what? If it's a pistol, so what? And if they try to break the window open or, smash it, it won't smash. It'll fracture, but they're not going to be able to really get it to ever open up like that. And you're not going to just stay parked and sit there. You're going to be driving away. But again, if you had a gun port, you open up the gun port and you blow the guy up. So I don't know why they stopped that. But the some of them have tear gas, where they have a closed air system in the car, and they got canisters of tear gas, and you push a button and they electronically go off, and it puts tear gas all around the car to get people away from the car, But most people just get the armoring, because that's usually you're going to get maybe 800 or 1,000 pounds extra weight in there. So then you get special run flat tires, you change the springs, you change the shock absorbers, and that's about it. You use the regular brakes, and you just might have to change your brakes more frequently, but you use the regular brakes, and the universal joint might get more wear and tear. You could change that. Your mileage goes down, and when you stop the car, it'll be a little with the just a little slug. I've had them. It gets a little sluggish, not very much, but you got to be careful with it. It's not as good as a car that's not armored for braking. And handling is decent. You just take it easy. So you watch your shocks and stuff. There's another way people do it. If you can, in an area where you can drive like that, you get yourself a 4-wheel drive, like the, what do they call them? I forget. The F-150, you get the F-250 usually, right? And you could even get a 350, but I think the 350 has the double wheels. You don't want those. So you get the 250 and you get the springs and the lifters, and you bring the car up high. If you're in a jurisdiction where you could bring it up pretty high, when people walk over to your car, you're all the way up in the air, so to speak, and they're not seeing you, they're seeing your door. Okay? So how are they going to carjack you? They're going to try to climb up. Well, what you do is you rig receding, there's a panel that you stand on, to climb up in the car, and you have that recede. You could have it electrically do it, and then you're high up in the air, and you don't even armor the car, and they're probably not going to bother with you. How do they do it? But can you set your car up that high? In a lot of jurisdictions, they'll just the highway patrol pull you over and give you tickets and try to get you off the street. So most places, like in America, you're not going to be able to do it. Other countries, you might be able to, like in Africa, but they may not care. You could get away with that. So nobody's going to really climb up there and do anything. If they do start shooting through the door, it's going to be wild pot shots. It's just something they don't want to mess with. So when you have the regular armor and carjackers come over to the car and they break the window, they try to shoot at you, and it stops it, and they're going to run away. Much better if you had a shooting port, and they come over to the car and they show you their gun, you show them their gun, and then when you open the shooting port, the first shot, you're going to shoot them. If you're crazy, you could lower the window and shoot them, and that works good because, a lot of the carjacking, they just smash the window and, they take a brick or something, and that's it. Also, when you park your car and you go shopping and you have packages in there, they can't break into the car. They just don't get in. You can't go smashing the windows with these things. It just shatters. I mean, it's going to cost you. It might cost you, $2,500 or $1,500 or something to fix the window after they shatter it, but they're not going to get in. It might be cheaper to let them get in and steal the packages. So Israel has a bunch of armored cars. They get them very, very high level here, level 7, which is working against explosives and stuff like that, where, the floor pan, the bottom of the car is going to be resistant from an explosive. But when you get up to level 7, I mean, your tires are wearing out every 4,000 or 5,000 miles. Your brakes are going every 4,000 or 5,000 miles. Your shock absorbers maybe every 2 years if you keep it that long. Your gas mileage goes down where you probably on the highway get 14 or 15, in the city 8 or 9 miles a gallon, or 7 or 8 or something. You got to be careful with making sure you got enough stopping distance, because you ain't stopping like a car anymore. And you got to do all kinds of stuff to make sure that you're not going to overheat, going up a hill, pulling that weight. You got to get a really big engine in your car. You don't buy the basic model, get the largest engine you can. And it's an expensive game. Rich people like to play it, and like I say, if they got, let's say, a daughter, and she wants to use the car, and they got her bulletproofed and stuff like that, and somebody sees her in the car at night at 11 o'clock at night coming back from someplace and decides he wants to go after her, he can't get into the car, and she could get help, that kind of thing. So they don't cost that much money to armor a car for pistols. They also have plastic sheeting. I don't know the right word for it. Something that looks like plastic sheeting. That it's a whole process. They wash your window and they put it on the inside of your windows with special thing and heat or something. You could do a car in 3 hours, probably, or 4 hours or something like that. And it's a laminate. and it stops pistols, and it stops like baseball bats and clubs and people breaking into the window. So if you just wanted superficial protection, they put that on. It has, if you do all your windows, the weight is maybe 25, 30 pounds or less even. It's nothing. Your car wouldn't know the difference. They put it on the windshield, the back window, the side windows, and your side windows in a lot of cars, it goes down a few inches below the door top. The glass goes in further, so you got some bullet protection. If they're going to try to shoot at you through the door, no. But if they're going to try to shoot at you through the window, you're going to be protected with pistols, And that's another thing they do, and you could get that done for several $100s. It's superficial protection, but it helps, if you get stuck in traffic and there's a riot going on and demonstrations, and they're running around and hitting cars with bats and sticks and breaking windows, and they're not going to break your window. No. So that's what's going on. Anyway, so I think we'll be at war real quick. I would think this Sunday, because the markets are still closed, but usually Friday is better. Friday afternoon, Friday evening, because then the world has a whole weekend to digest it, and then they're not that scared. Where if it starts on Monday, there's going to be probably sharp reactions. Gas will go up, and gold and silver will go up really quick and fast. So I don't know. Maybe it'll drag on till Friday, till Trump attacks. I don't know. On the other hand, he should be smart enough to realize that they are getting ready for a big battle, and the Iranians, and he should strike first, because if he strikes the missile launchers, he could cause a prevention of a lot of chaos to Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman. So Trump may be worried about the other Arab states, because if Iran causes a lot of damage to them, it'll get out. Oil wells, oil refineries, or oil storage tanks, oil pipelines, natural gas storage pipelines, stuff like that. And that'll be rather catastrophic for them and the world. And that's something I think Trump doesn't want, unless I'm wrong, but I don't think so. So I don't know. I would say it'll be between today and next Friday. Iran may take the initiative and do a first strike. Yeah. All right, let's pray. Please pray for me that I get the passwords resolved so I can set up the new iPad. I think I found my password list for some of them anyway. So please pray I get this successfully done without getting locked out of anything from my passwords on the new thing. Okay, I appreciate that. I'll pray and you can agree. My Heavenly Father, Jehovah, I pray I get the new iPad set up successfully with all the passwords I need, without getting locked out or having any difficulties. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. And please agree with that if you're a believer, okay? I think these passwords are real. They go back a few months when I set them up, so it should be. I saved them and I forgot where I saved them, but I found them. But I'm still missing one important password. Anyway, we'll see what happens. I'll give it a try. Uh, and It used to be when you set your iPad up, it just transferred everything over with the passwords, and you didn't have to log in. You didn't have any problems with it. Now they make it always harder, harder. Well, always trying to make us think. When they make it harder and Satan makes it crazier and crazier on us, they want you to think it's for your own protection. Hogwash. It's Satan. All right. My Heavenly Father, Jehovah, I pray for me and my wife and all the true believers in the household. I pray that we would have your strength, stamina, and endurance. We'd have your healing and recuperative power flowing through us, healing us where we need it, and we would have your, for us and our animals and pets, we'd be safe and secure and happy, healthy, and whole. And I pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I pray that any of us need a job, we get a good job. If any of us need clients and customers, we get those. I pray we all have adequate finances and then some. I pray I can do better videos. I pray that Israel doesn't suffer any more damage that needs rebuilding and so forth. I pray that we would all stay strong in you and your word and know that all things work the good for those that love the Lord. And I pray that we can help those that need help coming out from the church world and getting into the true gospel. And I pray we have peace and joy and calm and rest. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, and you can agree with that. And spiritual warfare. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, I loose off of me and my wife and all the true believers and their household, any and their families, any witchcraft or spells or curses is lifted off or loosed off us of no value, no effect forever. And if any of the people in the families or the household have unclean spirits in them, I command all these unclean spirits to depart from these people, never return unto them again. And I do all this to you, my Heavenly Father, Jehovah, B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. I submit this to you, my Heavenly Father, B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. And you can agree with this even if it's in a video. And I don't know, yesterday there was some marked attempt to stop the circulation of my YouTube. I don't know why or who or how, but B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, I pray, my Heavenly Father, that you see to it that many people watch these videos, and especially the right people that you want to watch these videos. And I submit this to you, my Heavenly Father, B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. All right, so we'll see what happens, and I send my shalom to all those who love Yeshua HaMashiach, and I'm out. Thanks, guys.